In 1942, a single-engine fighter ruled the skies. So agile, so lethal, that Allied pilots feared it before they even saw it. In those early battles of the Pacific War, no one could touch it. But just 2 years later, that same warplane became target practice in what would be remembered as the most one-sided aerial massacre in modern history. There was no secret weapon, no miracle ace. What changed was something far bigger, a total reinvention of how wars are fought in the air. How did one aircraft go from invincible to obsolete almost overnight? What happened on those 2 brutal days in June 1944? And how did this battle reshape the entire future of air combat? To understand the day Japan lost the sky, we need to go back to the reign of a fighter that once seemed unstoppable, before everything came crashing down. In the early years of the Pacific War, the Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0 ruled the skies. Light, fast, and extraordinarily agile, it outclassed every Allied fighter it encountered between 1941 and 1942. American pilots described it as terrifying, a machine that could outturn, outclimb, and outfight anything they flew. In these early months, the Zero was not just a plane. It was a symbol of Japanese air supremacy. The Zero carved its reputation in fire. At Pearl Harbor, it escorted bombers with deadly efficiency. At Wake Island and across the Philippines, it shredded American defenses. Over the Coral Sea, it dominated dogfights and inflicted heavy losses. Allied pilots flying inferior aircraft found themselves outmatched and outmaneuvered, often surviving only by diving away and fleeing. At the time, America's primary naval fighter was the F-4F Wildcat, rugged but slow, underpowered, and unable to compete with the Zero in a turning fight. Losses mounted quickly. Pilots with minimal combat experience were thrown into the sky, and many never returned. It became painfully clear that courage alone would not be enough to win the air war in the Pacific. American engineers listened carefully to these failures. Combat reports were studied line by line. Every strength of the Zero was analyzed, and every weakness noted. The conclusion was radical. The United States would not try to outturn the Zero. Instead, it would outbuild, outgun, and outsurvive it. The result was the F-6F Hellcat, developed by Grumman. It was a completely different philosophy of air combat. Heavily armored, equipped with self-sealing fuel tanks, and armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns, the Hellcat was built like a flying brawler. Powered by a 2,000 horsepower engine, it could dive fast, climb hard, and absorb damage that would instantly destroy a Zero. Pilots described the difference with a simple analogy. The Zero was a dancer. The Hellcat was a boxer. By 1943, Hellcats began arriving in large numbers, and the balance of power quietly began to shift. By the summer of 1944, the Pacific War had reached a decisive stage. Japan's early victories were fading, and its empire was shrinking. After defeats at Midway and Guadalcanal and relentless losses to American submarines, Japan's naval strength was eroding fast. The islands of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, the Marianas, became Japan's final defensive line. If they fell, American bombers would be within range of Tokyo itself. When U.S. forces landed on Saipan on June 15, 1944, Japan responded with desperation. Operation Ego was activated, a final gamble to destroy the American fleet in one massive, decisive battle. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa assembled what remained of Japan's carrier force: 9 carriers, 5 battleships, and over 400 aircraft. On paper, it looked formidable. In reality, it was a hollow force. Most of Japan's veteran pilots were already dead. Their replacements were young, hastily trained, and often had fewer than 100 flight hours, some less than 50. Their aircraft were still mainly Zeros, agile but fragile, lacking armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. Opposing them was Task Force 58, 15 American carriers carrying nearly 900 aircraft, most of them Hellcats, backed by radar coordination and overwhelming industrial support. At dawn on June 19th, Ozawa launched his attack. For massive waves of Japanese aircraft lifted off and headed east across 200 miles of open ocean. Their objective was clear: destroy the American carriers and stop the invasion of Saipan. What they did not know was that they had already been detected. Radar-equipped American picket ships spotted the incoming formations long before they came into view. American fighter directors reacted instantly. Hellcats were scrambled, vectored precisely toward the enemy. Instead of being surprised, the Japanese flew straight into a perfectly organized defensive trap. As one pilot later recalled, the sky filled with blue American fighters waiting above them. The first wave was annihilated. Hellcats dove from altitude, firing devastating bursts into tightly packed Japanese formations. Zeros exploded, bombers burst into flames, and aircraft spiraled helplessly into the sea. Only a handful broke through, and those that did caused minimal damage before being destroyed by anti-aircraft fire. By midday, nearly 250 Japanese aircraft were gone. Japan's air superiority vanished in a single morning. American pilots struggled to describe what they were seeing. One famously called it a turkey shoot. It was not bravado, it was shock. The imbalance was total. Japanese pilots flew courageously, but without coordination, training, or effective tactics. The Hellcats' combination of speed, firepower, and survivability proved overwhelming. While the skies burned, another disaster unfolded beneath the waves. American submarines stalked Ozawa's fleet. The USS Albacore struck Ozawa's flagship, the carrier Taiho, with torpedoes that ruptured fuel tanks. At first, the damage seemed manageable until gasoline fumes ignited hours later, triggering a massive explosion that sank the carrier. Almost simultaneously, the USS Kavala torpedoed the carrier Shokuku. 3 direct hits sent flames racing across her deck. She sank with over 1,000 crew members aboard. With 2 carriers gone, Ozawa's command structure collapsed. Communications failed. The fleet scattered. On June 20th, American scouts located the retreating Japanese fleet over 300 miles away. Despite the distance and fading daylight, Admiral Mark Mitcher ordered a massive strike. More than 200 aircraft launched in a final pursuit. It was a risky decision, but one driven by the knowledge that Japan was finished. The attack found its targets just before sunset. Bombs and torpedoes struck the light carrier Hayo, which exploded and sank. Other carriers, including Zuikaku and Chiyoda, were badly damaged. Japanese air resistance was weak and uncoordinated. There were few planes left and fewer skilled pilots to fly them. As darkness fell, American pilots faced a new danger: fuel exhaustion. Mitcher made an unprecedented decision, ordering all carriers to turn on their lights to guide returning aircraft home, a move that risked submarine attack. Many planes still ditched at sea, but hundreds of pilots were saved. By the end of June 20th, the outcome was undeniable. Japan had lost over 400 aircraft and 3 carriers. Nearly all remaining trained naval aviators were dead. The United States lost relatively few aircraft, most due to fuel shortages, not enemy fire. Japan's carrier aviation had been destroyed in 2 days. One American officer summarized it bluntly: "Today, we destroyed Japanese naval aviation. We didn't weaken it. We destroyed it." The impact of the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was immediate and irreversible. Japan had not just lost aircraft, it had lost its most valuable resource: experienced pilots. Unlike machines, pilots could not be replaced quickly. Training programs were already shortened to dangerous levels, and there was no time left to rebuild. From this point forward, Japanese fleets sailed without air cover strong enough to protect them. The battle marked a fundamental shift in modern warfare. It was the end of the age of individual aces and the beginning of industrial air power. As one documentary would later describe it, the era of the ace ended. The era of machines, systems, and mass training began. The Hellcat became the symbol of this transformation. By the end of the war, it would account for more than 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed, with a kill ratio of 19-1, one of the most dominant records in aviation history. But its true legacy was not in numbers. It was in what it represented: adaptation, production, and coordination on an unprecedented scale. In 1942, the sky belonged to Japan. In 1944, it fell silent, and when it spoke again, it spoke English. From the Marianas onward, American carriers would strike wherever they pleased. The road to Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and ultimately Japan itself was now open. As the sun set over the Pacific, pilots looked out across burning oil slicks and floating wreckage. One veteran quietly reflected, "They fought with courage. But we arrived with a system." In that sentence lay the truth of the battle and the future of warfare itself.